When we talk about recognizing emotional and social gaps in women's lives, it's important to first understand that many of these gaps are not always visible. They don't show up on the surface like a scar or a wound that you can immediately point to. Instead, they reveal themselves quietly, in the way a woman carries herself, in the pauses between her words, in the silences she allows to hang in the air, because she doesn't feel safe enough to express what's really going on inside. And too often, the world is in such a rush, so caught up in its own noise, that those small signals are overlooked. Think for a moment about the woman you pass on the street who always smiles. It seems genuine, doesn't it? Bright, effortless, maybe even inspiring. But what if that smile is her shield? What if it is carefully worn to cover a deep emptiness she feels when she goes home to silence at the end of the day? You see, emotional and social gaps are not always marked by sadness or obvious struggle. Sometimes they hide behind achievement, behind laughter, behind the image of strength that society so often demands women maintain. When we slow down and look a little deeper, we begin to notice the little cracks. The friend who is always there to support others but rarely opens up about her own life. The colleague who throws herself into work but avoids conversations about her personal world. The family member who gives and gives but looks away when it comes to receiving. These are often the women with the biggest unspoken holes inside them, holes that have been carved out by years of being told to stay strong, to hold it together, to be everything for everyone else without ever being allowed to show vulnerability. And the truth is, those emotional gaps can be incredibly heavy to carry. Imagine feeling like you're surrounded by people every single day, yet still feeling profoundly alone. Imagine being celebrated for your resilience while secretly wishing someone would notice your exhaustion. That loneliness, that longing for genuine connection, is what I mean by emotional and social holes. They are not weaknesses, they are signs of humanity. But when they go unnoticed, they deepen, and the woman carrying them starts to believe she is unseen, unheard, and unvalued. Now, recognizing these gaps doesn't mean we need to play savior or assume every woman we meet is broken. It means we practice empathy. It means we pay attention with more than just our eyes and ears. We pay attention with our hearts. If a woman is always the one to say, "I'm fine," maybe the most compassionate response is not to take her words at face value, but to gently create space where she feels safe enough to share the truth behind them. Sometimes, the simple act of listening without judgment can be the bridge across that gap. Social gaps, too, can be subtle. They show up in the way some women are excluded from conversations or opportunities, not because they lack talent or intelligence, but because they lack the connections or the networks that others take for granted. They show up in how a woman might sit at a table but feel invisible. Her ideas brushed aside until someone else repeats them. And those gaps are not just about missed chances. They chip away at confidence, at self-worth, at the belief that her presence matters. When we begin to notice these patterns, we can respond differently. We can be intentional about inviting voices that are usually quiet into the conversation. We can validate contributions that may otherwise go unrecognized. We can check in on the friend who seems to always have it all together, not because she asked for help, but because we sense she might need it. Recognizing emotional and social gaps means refusing to accept the easy story and being willing to see the harder truth that lies beneath. There's something profoundly transformative about being truly seen. I've spoken with women who said that the moment someone looked them in the eye and said, "I notice you're struggling and I'm here," was the moment they began to believe in themselves again. Not because the problem disappeared, but because the hole they carried didn't feel so wide anymore. It had been met with understanding, with presence, with care. That's what we all have the power to do: recognize the gaps and hold space for them. Because the reality is, every woman is carrying a story. Some are filled with triumph and joy, yes, but many are also threaded with loss, with silence, with burdens she thought she had to carry alone. When we recognize those unseen struggles, we're not just identifying gaps, we're opening the door for healing, connection, and belonging. So, when you look at the women in your life, look closer. Listen not just to what they say, but to what they don't say. Pay attention to the pauses, the hesitations, the moments when their eyes drift away as though they're holding something back. And then choose to see them, not as people defined by their holes, but as whole human beings who sometimes need the simple gift of being recognized. Because at the end of the day, recognition is not about fixing anyone. It's about affirming that they are not invisible. It's about reminding them that no matter what gaps they feel inside, they still matter deeply. And sometimes that reminder is all it takes to start closing the distance between where they are and where they long to be. When we talk about gaps in opportunities for women, what we are really talking about is the way the world has quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, drawn invisible lines around what women can or cannot do. These lines don't always come in the form of direct rejection. They often come in subtle ways, in unspoken messages, in doors that never quite open wide enough. And if we are not paying attention, we miss how deeply those gaps and opportunities shape the confidence, the potential, and even the dreams of women around us. Think about how early this starts. A young girl might be told she can dream, but when she shows ambition, she's labeled as too much. When she speaks up, she's told to tone it down. When she chooses to be bold, she's quietly reminded that humility looks better on her. Those are not just words, they are barriers. They are the beginnings of holes carved into her sense of what she's allowed to reach for. And over time, those words add up. They become the silent architects of missed opportunities, convincing her that maybe certain paths weren't meant for her at all. As women grow, those gaps widen. In the workplace, in education, in leadership, we see countless examples where opportunities exist, but they are not equally accessible. A woman may be equally qualified, equally skilled, sometimes even more so, but her name is skipped over because of bias that has nothing to do with her ability. She may find herself working twice as hard, not for recognition, but just to prove she belongs in the room. And sometimes she doesn't even get the invitation to step into that room in the first place. But opportunity gaps aren't only professional, they're personal too. How often do women put their own aspirations aside because of the expectations placed on them to care for others first? How often do women silence their goals because they've been told they are impractical, selfish, or unrealistic? Opportunity is not just about the big stages of life. It's about the quiet moments where a woman is either encouraged to step forward or nudged to step back. Recognizing these gaps means acknowledging that talent, brilliance, and determination are not confined to one gender, but the pathways to express them are not equally paved. For some women, the road is smooth and supported, but for many others, it is filled with cracks, detours, and barriers they had no part in creating. And when those barriers go unseen, they keep multiplying. Now, here's the thing: women notice these gaps long before anyone else does. They know when they are overlooked. They know when their voice has been softened or ignored. They know when they are present, but not really seen. And while they may keep moving forward with resilience, those missed opportunities leave marks. They create spaces in a woman's life that are filled not with failure, but with chances she never got to take. This is where awareness becomes powerful. When we recognize that these opportunity gaps exist, we begin to change how we interact with women in our communities, in our workplaces, in our families. We begin to ask different questions. Instead of assuming she doesn't want the opportunity, we start asking why she wasn't considered. Instead of telling her to wait her turn, we start asking why her turn hasn't already come. Instead of praising her for being patient, we begin asking whether patience is really just another way of saying she was kept on the sidelines. Opportunities are the bridges that allow potential to become reality. And when those bridges are missing, the gap between what a woman could be and what she is allowed to be grows wider. Recognizing this means not just seeing the gap, but daring to do something about it. Sometimes that means mentoring, sometimes that means advocating, and sometimes it simply means saying, I believe you are capable, and I'm going to stand with you until others see it too. I've met women who told me that one simple opportunity, a chance to lead a project, a chance to share their idea, a chance to sit at the table, completely changed the trajectory of their lives. Not because the opportunity itself was extraordinary, but because it was finally a moment where someone else saw what they had known all along, that they were ready, that they were capable, that they were worthy. And when that recognition meets opportunity, transformation begins. We must also acknowledge that opportunity gaps are not the same everywhere. For some women, it may be education that's missing. For others, it may be access to resources or the freedom to make choices about their own lives. But the principle is the same. Where opportunity is absent, potential is stifled. And where potential is stifled, humanity as a whole loses out on brilliance, innovation, and progress that could have been. So as we move through this conversation, I ask you to open your eyes, not just to the women who are shining, but to the women who haven't yet had the chance to shine, because often their light is no less bright. It has simply been hidden behind walls they did not build. The question is whether we will walk past those walls or whether we will help create doorways through them. Recognizing opportunity gaps is not about pity. It is about justice. It is about fairness. It is about finally saying that no one should have to fight twice as hard just to be seen for what they already are. It's about creating a world where women don't have to shrink themselves to fit into opportunities, but where opportunities expand to embrace the full range of who women can be. And when that happens, when women are given the same access, the same chances, the same belief, we don't just close the gaps for them, we close the gaps for all of us. Because when women rise into their full potential, families rise, communities rise, entire generations rise. That is the power of recognizing the holes created by missing opportunities and daring to fill them. One of the most powerful yet often overlooked ways to recognize the holes in a woman's life is to pay attention not just to what she says, but to what she doesn't say. Silence is a language of its own, and it carries truths that words sometimes cannot. Many women have learned through years of experience that speaking openly about their struggles, their disappointments, or even their desires can be met with judgment, dismissal, or misunderstanding. So instead of speaking, they hold back. They tuck their real feelings into pauses. They bury their real stories beneath polite smiles, and they let their silence speak in ways we rarely take the time to hear. When a woman avoids a topic, it isn't always because there is nothing to say. More often, it's because there's too much to say, and she doesn't know if the space is safe enough to hold it. Think about the countless moments when someone asks, "How are you?" And the automatic reply is, "I'm fine." That two-word phrase is one of the most common disguises women use to cover up what's really going on. Behind those words could be exhaustion, loneliness, frustration, or even heartbreak. But because the world is often too hurried to listen deeply, "I'm fine" becomes the easiest way to keep moving without drawing attention to the void inside. Listening beyond the surface requires more than just hearing words. It requires attunement. It's about noticing the tone that doesn't quite match the message, the eyes that dart away when a subject comes up, the hesitation before answering a question. Those moments are not random. They are clues. They are invitations to lean in, to create space for honesty, to let someone know that their truth won't be too heavy for us to carry with them. It's also important to understand that many women are conditioned to downplay their struggles. They've been told that complaining makes them ungrateful, that vulnerability makes them weak, and that admitting they're hurting will make others see them as incapable. So they edit their stories. They choose safer versions of the truth. They give you the headline, but not the full article. And while on the surface it may look like everything is fine, beneath that surface lies an ocean of untold stories, unexpressed fears, and unmet needs. To really know a woman, we must listen between the lines. When she jokes too often about being tired or stressed, perhaps that's her way of hinting at something deeper without feeling exposed. When she avoids talking about certain relationships, maybe that's where the pain still lingers. When she changes the subject quickly, perhaps that's where her wounds are still healing. Listening beyond the surface means respecting those signals and offering presence instead of pressure. It's not about forcing someone to spill their secrets. It's about letting them know that if they ever choose to, you'll be there without judgment. And sometimes, the silence itself is the most telling. Think about the woman who once used to dream out loud but no longer talks about her aspirations. Think about the woman who used to share her ideas boldly but now sits quietly in the background. That silence often doesn't mean the dreams are gone. It means they've been shut down too many times. It doesn't mean the ideas disappeared. It means they were dismissed one time too many. When we recognize those silences for what they really are, we see the holes left by neglect, by rejection, by the weight of constantly having to prove oneself. The beauty of listening beyond the surface is that it allows us to meet women where they really are, not where they pretend to be. It allows us to validate emotions that have long been ignored. It allows us to say, "I see you even when you're quiet. I hear you even when you don't speak." And sometimes that acknowledgement alone begins to fill the emptiness. Because for many women, The greatest pain is not in carrying the burden, but in carrying it unseen. What happens when we start listening this way is remarkable. Women begin to feel safer. They begin to test the waters of vulnerability. They begin to share the pieces of themselves they once kept hidden. And when those pieces are met with empathy instead of judgment, the silence slowly transforms into trust, and trust is the bridge that connects us to their true selves. It takes practice. It takes patience. It takes resisting the urge to rush into solutions or advice. Most of the time, listening beyond the surface is not about fixing. It's about being present. It's about being the kind of person who doesn't just wait for their turn to speak, but actually leans in to understand. When a woman senses that kind of presence, she doesn't have to disguise her gaps with humor or hide them behind silence. She can bring them into the light, knowing that she won't be shamed or dismissed for having them. And here's the truth. When women are allowed to share the unspoken parts of their lives, not only do they heal, but they also empower others. Their honesty becomes a mirror for those who are still quiet, showing them that they too can step forward with their truth. It creates a ripple effect where silence is no longer a prison, but a pause before the courage to speak. That's why listening beyond the surface matters so deeply. It reminds women that their stories, spoken or unspoken, are worthy of being honored. It reminds them that even in their quietest moments, they are still heard, still valued, and still deeply seen. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can ever say to a woman is not with our words at all, but with the simple act of listening to the silence she has carried for far too long. When we recognize that women carry gaps in their lives, emotional gaps, opportunity gaps, or the silences that conceal their struggles, the question that follows is, what do we do about it? Recognition is only the first step. The real impact comes when we move from simply noticing the holes to actually helping fill them. And let me be clear, filling the gaps doesn't mean fixing people. It doesn't mean swooping in to rescue anyone. What it means is offering support, encouragement, and empowerment in ways that allow women to step fully into their own strength. Too often, women are told they should already have it all together, that they should be able to handle everything without breaking a sweat. That pressure creates even bigger holes because it convinces them that asking for help is weakness. But when we create spaces where women can lean without shame, we're not making them weaker. We're reminding them that strength isn't about doing everything alone. Strength is about knowing that you don't have to carry it all by yourself. Support can be as simple as listening without interruption. It can be as gentle as offering encouragement when you notice self-doubt creeping in. It can be as practical as opening a door of opportunity or sharing a resource that someone else might not have had access to. Support is not always grand or dramatic. Sometimes it's found in the everyday moments, an affirming word, a reminder that someone matters, an invitation to be included instead of overlooked. Empowerment, on the other hand, goes beyond support. Empowerment is not just lifting someone when they're low, it's helping them see that they already had the wings to fly. It's not giving them strength, it's showing them the strength they already carried within. Empowerment is when you say to a woman, "You belong in this room. You belong in this conversation. You belong at this table." And the more she hears that, the more she starts to believe it for herself. I have seen women completely transform when they're given that kind of empowerment. The woman who once whispered her ideas suddenly speaks them with confidence. The woman who thought her voice didn't matter begins to realize it can move hearts. The woman who thought she had to settle begins to realize she has choices. Empowerment doesn't just fill holes, it expands horizons. But empowerment also requires us to challenge the systems and mindsets that created the gaps in the first place. It means asking ourselves why women so often feel unsupported, why they are expected to be silent about their pain, why they are taught to be grateful for scraps of opportunity instead of being given full access to everything they deserve. Filling the gaps isn't just about comforting the individual. It's about changing the culture that allowed those gaps to exist at all. That's why every small action matters. When we mentor a younger woman, we're not just helping her, we're helping close the generational gap of guidance and support. When we celebrate the achievements of a woman in our circle, we're not just affirming her, we're showing others that women's success deserves to be recognized and honored. When we advocate for equal pay, equal representation, and equal opportunities, we're not just balancing the scales for one person, we're helping reshape the future for all women. What I've learned is that empowerment is contagious. When one woman feels supported and valued, she carries that energy forward. She begins to support others, she begins to lift others, and soon the gap that once felt overwhelming begins to shrink, not just for her, but for everyone connected to her. That's how community is built, not by one person filling every hole, but by all of us recognizing that we each have something to give, and when we give it, we multiply its impact. It's also important to remember that empowerment is not about perfection. You don't need to have all the answers to support someone. You don't need to solve every problem to make a difference. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can say is, I don't know what to do, but I'm here with you. Presence itself can be powerful. A hand to hold, a shoulder to lean on, a voice that says, you are not alone. These things may seem small, but they can close gaps that years of silence could not. And let's not forget that empowerment also means challenging women themselves to believe in their worth. Because sometimes the deepest hole is the one created by self-doubt. Encouraging women to see themselves as worthy, capable, and enough is just as important as creating external opportunities. It's about reminding them that even if the world has tried to diminish their value has never changed. So when we talk about filling the holes women carry, we're not talking about charity. We're not talking about pity. We're talking about dignity. We're talking about humanity. We're talking about building a world where women don't have to hide their struggles, where they don't have to beg for chances, where they don't have to pretend they're fine when they're not. We're talking about creating an environment where women can stand in their fullness, seen, supported, and celebrated. Because in the end, empowerment is not about doing something for women. It's about standing with women until they see that they can do it for themselves. And when that happens, when those gaps are no longer empty spaces, but bridges of connection, opportunity, and confidence, we all become stronger. That is the power of choosing not just to notice the holes, but to help fill them with support, encouragement, and the unwavering belief that every woman deserves to be whole.